I beg you to try it, Patricio.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricio. You're there once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here, and this is Trish Wood Is Critical. If you saw, like I did, the video of Kellie-Jay Keen, aka Posie Parker, being spirited away from a Let Women Speak meeting in Auckland, New Zealand, you're probably as horrified as I am about what I saw. It was a rather petite woman who had gone there to speak about how women feel about some of the trans extremism undercutting our rights, and was in short order surrounded by what appeared to be, in fact, what was a baying mob of angry, I don't know if we even call them activists. I don't even know what was going on there psychologically and sociologically, except a lot of people who seem to hate women fighting for their rights. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I was really shaken up by it. As you guys know, I'm no spring chicken. I was around the first time we made gains in this battle against being pushed down and down and down. And I was very, very upset by what I saw. I couldn't believe it. And I think what makes it worse is that it seems to be being sanctioned by legacy media, of course, and even governments and some police forces. They did not dive in to pull her out of there at the beginning of this thing. So something is going very, very wrong. And we have Kellie-Jay Keen here today to talk to us about what happened and where her Let Women Speak movement is going in the future. I want to say this at the start here for my male listeners, and I have many. The word feminist is a bad word to some people. I call myself one, but I don't have to justify what that means, except I was a woman who was ahead of my time in many elements of my professional life and broke some barriers, etc. And I feel that was part of the feminist struggle. I don't agree with everything feminists say today or said then. I'm the mother of two wonderful young men. I love men. I love my boys. I want them to be treated properly in the world. But the feminists are the ones, many of them, who are fighting this battle. And I don't think Kellie-Jay Keen actually calls herself one of those, which is interesting. We all have to disregard what we don't like in this battle. We're not going to agree on everything, people. We are not. Especially now when everything is so fractious. We have to take what is dire and focus on that, regardless of the other stuff we might disagree on, and then move on to the next thing. That's the best that we can do. And so for the men who listen to this show, whom I love and interact with a lot on Substack now, you're coming over, it's really great. And I get wonderful emails from you. And I've met many of you as well at various events. Stick around. I got a wonderful comment on my Substack from a male listener who said men in pants must stand in front of the women and protect them from the men in dresses. So thank you for that. But this show is going to be about women's voices today. And I kind of advertise it on Substack as Let Women Speak because a wonderful thing happened. I put out a call for women to leave voice messages for the show and for Kellie-Jay Keen. We're going to play a couple of them in the interview. It's an extraordinary interview with her. She's an amazing person. And then the ones that aren't played in the interview will be playing at the end of the show. This show was actually planned before the shooting in Nashville, which was very, very shocking. I understand from something I read in one of the British papers just a few minutes ago, this is Thursday that we're recording this, that they may indeed release the manifesto of this young woman or trans person named Audrey Hale, who killed 6 people, including 3 children in a Christian school. very, very shocking event and a sad event. But I must say that the response to it is almost as bad as the event itself. Not quite. Nothing is worse than losing children. But wow, you can really see how completely screwed up the media is and how screwed up the left is over what happened in that school to those children. And so that, coupled with what happened to Kellie-Jay Keen, is very, very troubling, I think, for all women today and all human beings today who are trying to make sense of this crazy thing that seemed to come out of nowhere. Now let me just say, when I say crazy thing, I want to put this disclaimer on it. The disclaimer from me is this: I fought for gay rights my whole adult life. Straight women were the gay community and, in fact, the drag culture's natural allies for decades. We marched with them. We fought for them. I covered AIDS with a nod to them being the main group who was dying, and I gave them lots and lots of airtime on the CBC, the ACT UP people with AIDS who were leading the movement against Tony Fauci, ironically. I did all that. I taught my boys to be gay positive in their relationships at school and in the world. And so I am not going to wear a moniker because extreme elements of that particular alphabet don't like what I'm going to say as a woman. I'm not transphobic, schmansphobic. Not happening. I'm not that at all. What I am phobic about is women being displaced from our own lives. Men cannot become women. They aren't women. That is a fantasy they're asking us to go along with, and I'm not doing it. Ironically, I think most people were much more likely to go along with a trans person's feelings that they were the other gender when it wasn't being shoved down our throats, just to be in polite society and to use their phrase, to be kind. But now, under this rubric of trans is all manner of people. You have your autogynephiles, men who get off sexually dressing like women, like maybe the teacher in Oakville, Trafalgar. It might have been that. Who knows? Probably, based on the research I did. You have cross-dressing men who've always been around, and they get some kind of anxiety relief from dressing as women. That's fine. It's a fetish. That's cool. There are the men who dress that way because they have some sense that they were maybe born in the wrong gendered body. And I don't think that they're probably the ones who are out there screaming at women either. I suspect they probably aren't. This is something new. And it also appears that some of the members of this extreme group also have some pretty serious mental health issues. And I'm starting to wonder if people who are unwell naturally kind of drift into that movement. I'm just guessing, and don't say Trish said all trans people are nuts. That's not what I'm saying. So don't do that. But we have to look objectively now at what's happening. And governments around the world have told us that we cannot ask these questions. If you are denying people gender affirming care, which means that men can put on a blonde wig, self-identify as a woman, get into our spaces, our shelters for battered women, our prisons for women, our swim teams. They just put on a wig and you can do it. It's ridiculous. And as I've said on the show before, how easily women have been thrown under the bus for this. And what you should also know is that the news coverage of the Nashville shooting has raised it's almost a threat level by the extremists on this issue. That's what's coming up on Twitter. It was coming up on Twitter, and then Twitter pulled some of it down. But trans rights or else is a shirt that was being sold with guns on it. Can you imagine if somebody who was in the MAGA movement did something like that? All hell would break loose, right? there were a couple of other really violent things that were tweeted out. One of them was about saying that they wished that the bullets had killed Republicans. Right? This was a trans person. I mean, what's going on out there? It's very, very bad. I'm going to read for you at the end of the show some very interesting information because I don't want to hog Kelly's time. I know you want to hear from Kelly, so I'm going to save my reporting that I pulled together for you for the extra part of the show. I'm going to do my pitch right now, which is that we're moving over to Substack very quickly. We've got premium material, and also your joining Substack as a paying subscriber is also general support just for the podcast, right? So if you're on Patreon or if you're on PayPal, come to Substack. We're having so much fun over here. And that small amount of money, it's like $5 or $7 a month. I know it adds up, but it's helping us to keep this work going and bring you people like Kellie-Jay Keen in a long form interview style as well, so you can really get to know her. Our last two premium episodes were, one was Seymour Hersh, maybe the world's greatest living investigative journalist, and the other one was an old favorite, Colonel McGregor. So that's what you get if you sign up on the paid plan at Substack. And the conversations are getting really interesting there too. So do think about that. That's where that man said men in pants should protect women from men in dresses. So that's the kind of good stuff we're getting. My Substack is Trish Wood Is Critical. My website is trishwoodpodcast.com, where there's merch. And you can actually leave, and this is what we did with the women for Kellie-Jay Keen, leaving messages for her. There's a little tab on the front page of my website where you can leave a voice, kind of a voicemail recording, and we can play them on the show. We really like that, and we love to hear from you. I haven't been saying this, but you should be on my Twitter too. So my Twitter is @WoodReporting. I think I'm getting unthrottled. Like I was up to 16,000 supporters and then all of it just stopped. Like I haven't gained a supporter in a year. And of course they were shadow banning and throttling people who were tweeting about COVID as I was. So I'm hoping to get that fixed, working on that right now. I just want to say one more thing about what we do here, and then we'll go to Kellie-Jay. And that is, I don't heavily curate the guests I bring on because I don't want to be part of the world we're emerging into where people only listen to people who share their way of thinking, right? It's called confirmation bias. And I don't think we learn anything that way. I really don't. So I may have someone on who's got some really, really good ideas, say, on Ukraine, but they're not very good on COVID. But I'm not going to reject their ideas on Ukraine because they're not very good on COVID. And we see that a lot in the indie journalism world now, where people are super good on national security stuff and they were terrible on COVID. But that doesn't mean their national security stuff isn't worth listening to. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm saying this just because I get, sometimes I get taken out to the woodshed by listeners who say, well, why'd you have that guy on? He's a lefty. And it's because I thought he had good ideas, and I don't always agree with everybody. And we don't need to, but we cannot live in two siloed worlds of information, which is how we live now. And I'm hoping that my little podcast is going to be a place where you respect my guest curation. And if I'm having somebody on that probably I disagree with on some things too, it's because they have a message that I think is worthwhile for you to know about. So that's enough of that. Here is my interview with Kellie-Jay Keen. And what I want to do for you just before we hear from her is play some tape of what she was surrounded by in Auckland, fleeing, I think, for her life, and so did she. This is what it sounded like.
Security. Go.
So that was chilling. If you go to my Substack, you can actually watch the video there. But now, here is my interview with Kellie-Jay Keen, aka Posie Parker from the UK. Hi, Kellie-Jay. How are you?
Yes, I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. That was not a rhetorical question, though, after the video I saw. I have to tell you, I was a little choked up seeing seeing so much in that tape, the mob around you, the threat of violence, the look on your face, the vulnerability. And it felt like an historic moment, perhaps a tipping point. But tell me what it was like for you in that moment. You looked really scared.
I did genuinely think I was not going to make it. It was just about putting one foot in front of the other. The security just said these words that I hadn't quite imagined were going to come out of their mouths, which were, "The police aren't coming." I didn't even know that they weren't going to be there when we got in the center of it. I just assumed that in the middle there were police protecting women wanting to speak, but there weren't. And he just said, "Yeah, the police aren't coming." And I just thought, right, okay, now we have to just step through. And so they formed like a circle around me. And every time I think about this and talk about this, I feel like, who am I? That I got the circle of people around me, and there were other women there that didn't get these bodyguards. And I tried to be objective and think, well, it was my name on every single poster of like, stomp on a TERF, hate Posie Parker's a Nazi or whatever. So I was just in the middle, and it was just about one foot in front of the other. And then at one point we got the crowd surged forward, and I sort of started going over, and I thought I was going to land on the floor. And I just thought, if I get to the floor, I'm never getting up. You become, you're depersoned the moment you hit the floor. And so I'm never getting up.
And that's an interesting point, Posie, because, or I'm going to call you Kellie-Jay, but because I did do a big show once on crush injuries, at these soccer games, right? Where, people have been, and rock concerts and stuff. And it kind of looked to me in a sense the same, like it wasn't just the threat of violence, but there was a dangerous crush of people moving in on you. Am I right in seeing it that way?
Yeah, it just, it wasn't like you lost your footing. It was like all of a sudden the whole thing just moved that way. It just moved sideways. And then as opposed to being sort of 90 degrees to the ground, I was like 45 degrees to the ground. And that wasn't like, normally to do that, you lose your footing, but it didn't go like that. Everything was very slow motion. I would imagine one's body and brain goes into some sort of protective processing where your brain has so much to process that it just focuses on some of the more important life-saving things. And so it was like everything just slowed, and we just put one foot in front of the other. And I don't remember speaking, but most of my language through that whole thing was just, oh God, like not even swearing. I wasn't even angry. I think that must be like a real I don't know, return to something where I'm not delivering words for the effect of anything else. I'm just expressing something without really thinking about what I'm saying. So it just came out as, oh God. And then I remember looking at Tanya, who's the silver-haired woman next to me, and she went down with me, and just, it was awful. And all you see are men. Like there were a few girls, but the people I could see, because I was surrounded by men. So then the only people you could see over the top were men, or men to the side of me, just rabid, just so angry and hateful. And, a mob is an organism in itself, isn't it? It behaves in a way that individual people don't. And so, it was terrifying. And then when we saw the police and I got in the car, I was still scared, because I've seen too many movies and too many sort of news reports where they then tip the police car. And then we had they put on the sirens so I could get to the police station. Then I had to be guarded in the police station. Most of the people in the police station weren't allowed to know that I was there. And it was a need to know basis. So I had 2 officers guarding me. Their commander or their sergeant knew that I was there, and the commanding officer, but nobody else knew I was there. Then I was transferred to the airport, where I spent some more time in a police station. And then I had 3 police guards, like armed police guards, until I got on the plane and it took off.
I'm curious about this. Were the police kind to you?
Yeah, they were lovely. Individual police weren't in charge of the fact that they didn't send in police into that mob. Like that's a way up the food chain operational decision, because nobody who cares about their, let's say they're all awful people and they don't care about the public at all, but they just care about their careers. No police officer should have been in a position to think not protecting women in that mob was good for their career even. So that is definitely way up the food chain type decision making.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also feel that, with good men, that there's a natural instinct to protect women and children. There should be. And we saw that. I don't know if you were really following the Uvalde, Texas shooting, where the cops stood outside that classroom where children were being shot to death for an hour before going in. And I thought, what is going on here? Like, how can you resist the urge? I don't know a single woman who wouldn't have gone in to rescue the children. And yet the police stood back. The ones in Nashville were terrific based on what I've seen. But it for police to stand back and see a vulnerable person in such a threat, I think you're right. I think it was an up the food chain decision. And I'm wondering why the up the food chain person, the chief or whatever they're called in New Zealand, would have made a decision like that. What is it, political correctness or what is it?
I don't know. Look, I reflect upon, in this country, we had police constables impregnating women and pretending to have families in order to spy on animal rights activists. I really do think that there are pretty nasty people involved in this coercion of our society into pretending that we think women have penises. I think there's some pretty nasty people, not necessarily the activists on the front line who are confused, kids that have been lied to, but even in amongst them, there were men that just looked completely out of place. In fact, in every situation where I've been protested by a large number of so-called like confused kids, entitled brats who've never been told no. And I think that is a parenting fail going back sort of 20, 30 years. But even in that, you will find just men that are just like whispering in ears, orchestrating the whole thing, little puppet masters somewhere behind, and they'll be like in their late 30s to sort of mid 50s and completely out of place in these movements. But they're sort of whispering, and they're definitely in charge.
It's interesting because I know in America, Andy No has been exposing the connection between some of the trans extremism and Antifa, which is, a coupling I don't even want to think about. But I wonder if that's what you're seeing. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, if you could be really blunt with me, is who were the people there? Obviously, there's the young women who are confused by gender studies at uni, and yes, they're brats. But were the men primarily what we would call on the surface trans men, and that were they dressed as women? What did they look like, the people who were moving towards you in that threatening way? If you could make a generality about them.
I would say everything. They all had male energy. So there was a massive drag queen, huge man, who apparently is known in New Zealand. So he's not just a random man dressed like a mockery of a geisha. There were like young men. I mean, most of them were young. I think we could say that most of them were below the age of 27. They all looked like they were in the, if you saw them in a cafe, you'd know that they thought queer theory was real. So, just a range, but men, just even if they had a light touch of, I think I'm non-binary or trans, they were still, you would say that they identified as men. You wouldn't say that they thought that they were women, the majority of them. But then I don't think I can really differentiate because my eyes really won't let me. So unless someone's gone all out to pretend to be a woman, I just read them as men anyway. And that doesn't mean that I don't think any other woman or radical feminists, I'm sure pretty much all of them do anyway. I'm just saying that it then becomes quite difficult to put myself back there and think, well, how were they dressed? Because I just felt men.
Yeah. Well, and that's a kind of a weird thing I've been thinking about over the last couple of years. You were into this and recognizing the danger and the folly of it long before many women, including myself. I was off having a career as a true crime producer, not paying very much attention, right? And then got kind of radicalized by stupid COVID policy, and then this kind of happened. And so I've had Jennifer Bielek on and Julie Bindel and some really cool people, right?
Yeah.
But I still don't understand when I see those crowds of what I will call trans extremists, who they are. Are they autogynephiles? Are they men who just find some anxiety relief in dressing as women? Are they men who get erections dressing as women? Are they actually gender dysphoric or whatever the medical term is? Like, I don't understand what this kind of block, this cohort of effeminate men that seem to be getting bigger and bigger and more angry actually represents, because they don't, I think most of them from a medical perspective qualify for what in the olden days we would have said was, classic kind of gender dysphoria that required what we used to call a sex change, right? As opposed to the cross-dresser who's just a guy who likes to put on drag and have a bit of fun. Now it's all kind of lumped into this protected status. It's a really hard thing for me to understand. What do you think is going on?
I'll tell you who's missing from that group, and possibly the only type of man missing from that group. And that is really good looking, attractive, heterosexual men. And I'm not even trying to be mean. I'm not saying there aren't heterosexual men in amongst them, but they're not kind of what I would call, well, I find the men that I find attractive are quite masculine men. So men that, I don't even know what that means. But like my husband's 6 foot, doesn't cry, likes to watch sport, doesn't watch it that much, but, is a typical bloke. Could definitely, that he could move a fridge if you needed him to, right? Those men aren't in that group. Men that are successful, heterosexual males in that group that are successful, and by that I mean manage to attract women, they're not in that group. The men that breeze easy through their lives as listened to and heterosexual women find attractive.
Attractive, yeah.
Those men aren't in that group. They don't need to.
I wonder, no, I was just going to say, I in researching what happened to you and also what happened in Nashville, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the shooters 5 years ago used to be men they called incels, right? Who were the guys in their parents' basement who couldn't get a date and everybody hated them, and they were shooting up places. Yeah. And everybody universally hated them. And it makes me wonder if that sort of subset of emasculated men has transitioned into the trans movement because it's popular and they get better stuff. I wonder.
Well, also, if you're an incel in your mother's basement, then you have watched more pornography than most people will watch in a lifetime. Certainly more than I would watch in a lifetime because I don't watch it. But, you will be absolutely steeped in porn and pornography. I think definitely the more you watch, the less you like women, and the more that women become separate parts. And this movement that's saying, hey, hang on a minute, you're not women, are middle-aged women. And we're not particularly attractive. We have we're not going to get pregnant. We're not going to have porn star bodies. I mean, not that many people do, but we're also not submissive like younger women, and certainly younger women that now are in a generation of men watching porn, and some women are now watching porn.
Well, and hookup culture, right? Which I've heard about from you. I'm like, what do you mean hookup culture? What does that mean? Like you're devaluing yourself, right? Like that.
Well, that means that no woman has a good time. That's what hookup culture means. It means that no woman is sexually kind of pleased, and her sexuality is absolutely measured on how much a man enjoys himself.
Yeah. So I want to unpack a little bit more about what happened to you in Auckland. But before I do, I put out a call to my beloved Substack readers and podcast listeners, to the women, especially who were moved by what happened to you. And they wanted to send a greeting. I encouraged them to. Some of them used their name and town. Some of them didn't. One of them was, worried because she lives alone. I mean, can you imagine sending a greeting to you and she's worried? I mean, this is where we are now, Kellie-Jay. So I want to start. Some of them are from the UK too. So, because we have listeners there, I want to play for you first a woman named Fiona from the UK, and this is her greeting for you.
Hi, this is a message for Kellie-Jay. This is Fiona from the UK, and I just wanted to say how utterly bereft, disgusted. How do you put into words how angry you feel when you witness something like you experienced in Auckland? Absolutely abhorrent. I'm the mother of twin girls who are now in their early 20s, and we cannot let this happen. We cannot let this happen. And I think this has been a real tipping point for many of us over here, and for many of us who have quietly thought that this is absolutely ridiculous, and that women are being sidelined and no longer have a voice, but are now seeing some of that playing out even more. I think the tipping point for me also has been, over the last few days, the labelling of you as anti-trans by the BBC and The Guardian. And I'm just so angry about that as well, and how our mainstream media is being manipulated. Or it's not being manipulated, it's manipulating us. There are millions of us behind you, want to stand with you. Don't let us be silenced.
Wow. So I guess, are you hearing a lot of that, Kellie-Jay? I think that piece of footage has maybe changed everything.
I think so. I've got a lot of letters from New Zealand, and God, the New Zealand media is horrendous. So bad. Australia too, but I mean, look, I'm not saying that I'm sitting in a country where the BBC and ITV have even really touched this issue, and they're pretty dreadful too. But New Zealand media just made stuff up, like not exaggerated. It wasn't just exaggeration. It wasn't just extrapolation. It was total lies. They sort of made up stories about me. And anyway, so in New Zealand, women feel so silenced, and clearly we've seen why. And I've got letters and they say, oh, didn't know anything about you until the media started going on and on about you. And then they tried to stop you coming in the country. And then, so then I wondered who you were. And then I watched what happened, and, we're right behind you. We had no idea. So there's loads of that. So that's always a great thing, because what I know is that the reason this is enabled in our society is because most people have no idea what's going on. They have no idea about any of it. And then some people that have an idea have no idea what we all know, which is that it's a really violent, aggressive, woman-hating movement. And so, I think I may have helped change a small piece of the world.
Well, one hopes. Was it the New Zealand media that had you drawn in a cartoon as a Trojan horse of white supremacy or whatever they're calling people. I know whenever anybody has a good message now, they're a white supremacist or a transphobe. I mean, they did that to our trucker movement here, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. But I'll tell you what's really interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but what's really interesting is one of the narratives, like this whole white supremacist, Nazi, far right adjacent. That was initially said by left-wing feminists, a few individuals, one you named when you were saying how many people you've had from the UK. So these women sort of talked about me taking money from the Heritage Foundation, just the most horrible, demonizing narratives. Now, we know that the TRAs use this anyway, but then normal people will listen to the TRAs and go, well, that sounds a load of rubbish. But then that will be totally backed up by left-wing women who know that men are not women. And those left-wing women will do guilt by association, and they will also not recognize the demonization of those truckers. So there's a real... When it comes to the left still, and I've left the left, I'm on neither side of the political divide. I think both are pretty shit for women. But when it comes to women still embedded in the left, rather, on the side of the left, they still operate in this guilt by association, false accusation, demonization, and ostracization of women. And I just think you cannot both care about women and still be loyal to the left, which will prostitute us, pimp us out, force us to carry other people's babies and mutilate kids and erase what it means to be a woman. It's just crazy.
Well, I've been saying lately, and especially to my male listeners, some of whom are on the conservative side, that this is the time now to not kind of care if someone is even labeled a feminist, right? We have to, this is the issue for women, regardless of where, we'll sort the rest of it out later. Mm-hmm. We will do that later. But if you have a wife or daughters or anybody in your life who is female, and most people do, this is what you got to focus on. And I had Billboard Chris on, and one of the big female voices in this movement who I admire very much had some bad things to say about the fact that I had him on. And I guess maybe he has, and he and I had an argument about women in the interview I did, because he thinks women are responsible for a lot of what's going on. And we argued it out. But at the same time, he's been beaten up. He's been devoted to getting this stuff out of schools and away from children. So we can't be picky. We can't have purity tests about this, right? We have to all agree that what's happening is wrong and fight that together. All of us, men, women, whatever your political stripe, we can't be. And you're right. The left is hopeless on this. They've sold everybody completely down the farm. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Worse than hopeless. They're often still sort of held up as some sort of moral authority. And the cognitive dissonance one has to, adopt to be able to say those things. I just don't get it. It's Julie Burchill, who I really strongly admire, sort of says, it's like being in a domestic violence situation. I'll leave it. He's not worth it. It's that sort of thing where you know that you're in an abusive situation, but you just stay in it. And the left, why not create? Well, I am creating a women's movement. I am creating a women's political party. So I'm going to try and do something about it. But yeah, I just don't understand it. How short-sighted are they? In fact, I listened to 4 academics, so academia, which I do have a lot of criticisms about, because they knew this was coming before we did, and they did little to stop it. And what I mean by that is those that tried to stop it got kicked out of academia. So we know that the ones left in actually didn't do enough about it. And they sort of say, oh, we were saying stuff, but nobody heard. And I was like, well, then that's a bad strategy. And you didn't deliver a good message, and you didn't try and get your message out in the right way. But these 4 academics are on this, I'm not saying they're elite, but in comparison to most people, they earn an awful lot of money and they have quite a privileged lifestyle. And one of them was saying, we can't abandon the left because then we'll really be in trouble.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, abandon what? The people that will put rich people's babies in poor women's wombs, who say that surrogacy is now going to be a human right, that people can demand a surrogate baby, that will mutilate the bodies of kids, that will eradicate what it means to be a woman in law and in life and in any social area. Like, what does anyone stand to gain by staying on the left?
Well, I heard something really interesting the other day. There's actually something I read in a tweet, and that is that Matt Taibbi, the great indie journalist in America, who testified before Congress about the Twitter censorship. He's a terrific journalist and a great guy as well, was visited by the Internal Revenue Service after he gave evidence against the Biden administration. And he said, I'm going indie. And I remembered when he said he was going indie, meaning walking away from the Democratic Party. He said during his testimony, I believe before Congress, that he'd voted for Joe Biden. I thought, really? Like, you've spent, I don't get it. Like he's a guy who has spent a good part of the last few years exposing terrible things the Biden administration has done. I don't know what it is about Democrats and people on the left. They don't like to walk away. I did. You did.
Yeah.
In part because, ironically, Hillary Clinton, but because I hated her so much. But it's really strange that people don't connect those dots.
Women in America who knew that Biden had already said that he was going to sign an executive order to put through the Equality Act, which absolutely in one fell swoop decimated all sex-based rights, female rights. It totally evaporated with that signature. They hated Trump so much that they voted for Biden. And I was saying before the election, I'm not saying either man is a good man, but one is a monster who apparently you're allowed to label as a monster. And the other, like, one will stand in front of you and roar, and the other one's under your bed and wait until you're asleep. And I just don't understand why they voted for Biden. And then they were saying, oh, the Equality Act's gone. I was like, you voted for it. He told you he was going to do it. It wasn't a surprise. You all voted for it. And then you have the audacity to keep criticizing Trump, which, I'm not a fan of either of these men, but this idea, I would say that there is like a Posie Parker derangement syndrome with women, both in the United States, I don't know about Canada, in the United States, Australia, and the UK. There is, honestly, the things that they say that I am doing, it's similar to the Trojan horse cartoon. There's a lot of women that are like, she's really right wing and she's just using women's rights to try and bring in her right wing policies. And I'm just thinking, who's got time to waste like 5, 7, 8 years pretending to be something and then go, I want to eradicate everybody's ability to move through this world socially, and I want to force loads of women to have babies they don't want. I mean, how ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm going to get to another one of our clips too before we run out of time here. Sorry. I want to play Jane from Montreal.
Hello, this is a message for Kellie-Jay. My name is Jane, and I live in Montreal. I am appalled, but not at all surprised by what happened to you in New Zealand. I have been part of this fight against gender ideology for the last several years, and with the violence I have seen against women who speak up on this issue, it is not at all surprising that this happened to you in Auckland, although I am terribly sorry that it did. I want to thank you for sticking up for women and putting yourself out there so publicly. I'm not even using my last name here because I live alone and I'm afraid of what certain gender identity activists might do to me if they were to find out who I am. So I thank you, Kellie-Jay, for putting yourself out there on behalf of all of us women and girls. Take care, stay safe.
So that was from Jane in Montreal, Canada. I think that's kind of universal from the people that we've heard from. I want to talk to you a bit more about what happened in Auckland. How did it come about? You got a visa to appear, I'm assuming.
Well, it's my event, so I've got a visa to host an event.
Okay. Were you expecting trouble? And was there an actual appeal made to the police for help that they refused, or were you just kind of hoping they would appear? Like how kind of structurally does that play out when you do an event like this?
Well, it's more sinister than that. So what happens in both Australia and New Zealand, you have to get a permit. And then in order to get the permit, you have to talk to the police. And so we have permission to be in that park. Counter protests also should get permission, and they should have adequate security. So they tried to then take the permission away, and they got the security company to write. They gave them 20 minutes as a deadline to write exactly what they were doing and how they were going to operate. The last couple of airports that I landed in Australia, I had police escorts from the plane. So they would, as soon as I got off the plane, these police would sort of I didn't ask for that. They just decided to do it. So the police would greet me. And this was after Melbourne. So this is after it's kind of news and different very high level politicians are commenting on me. And so New Zealand police had asked where I was going, like what time I was arriving and where I was staying. So I was thinking, okay, this is going to be, they want to make sure I'm safe. So I thought this is going to be they're going to escort me from the airport to the hotel. That's what I thought. And I couldn't have a chauffeur or a driver or taxis anymore. I had to get security to pick me up from the airport and take me to airports and make sure they're sort of around, because by this time my life, was I wasn't feeling particularly safe, but I felt like I should make all these sort of extra plans to keep me safe. So they don't pick me up from the airport. I get hauled into, this woman says, oh, would you like to come and skip the queue? And she takes me in an interrogation area, searches through all my stuff and talks to me for 2 hours about what I'm doing in New Zealand. And this is after they tried to stop me getting in twice with High Court, just to say that women don't have penises anyway. So I have this interrogation, go to my hotel. My original hotel has cancelled. I get that news on the flight on the way over. So I've got another one booked. Where I stay that night, when I wake up the next day, there's a letter under my door that's threatening, telling me they know what I'm wearing, how I should leave the country, how they hate me. And like, we see you. And then I go to this event, and the police were supposed to be. So I'm thinking the police are there. The women organised have talked to the police. The police have assured them that they're going to be there. There is going to be a police presence. So there are police vans and vehicles on the outskirts of the park. But when you get right in the centre of that mob, there are no police. None. Not one at all. So that is the significant thing. And then when I eventually get to the edge of the park, as you can probably see from the footage, that's when we see some police.
That's really, really shocking. Is there any possibility that you are going to come to Canada for an event?
There is. I applied and got a visa, and then whilst I was away in Australia, I got a message asking for further information. So I'm doubtful that I can make it. Might be. If that were to occur, then I might go to the closest place in America, to Canada, and invite Canadians to come there.
Like Buffalo or something.
Yeah. If I can't get in your country, I can't come.
But why wouldn't you be able to come in? What Kellie-Jay, like, are you saying it's...
They can just refuse me entry. They can say that I'm a bad person.
What do you make of what happened in Nashville? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, we're still waiting. As of a few minutes ago, we're recording this on Thursday, so maybe by Friday it will be out. But a couple of minutes ago, before we started rolling, I did read in a British paper, I think The Independent, that they are going to release the manifesto of this young woman who went in and shot up a school and killed 3 kids and 3 adults. Which is a tragedy. And clearly she was struggling with mental health stuff. That's what I think. I think a lot of these people are.
Yeah.
And I feel more generous. I feel more generous toward her probably than I should, but I feel generous toward all these young people who are struggling in one way or another. And perhaps it just manifested in this in the trans situation. But what was your response? There was a lot of talk. Oh, they did it because, her parents didn't like the fact she was gay, and maybe it was a Christian school, so they, whatever. Like, what was your response? What was your response to it?
Well, I'm very mindful that some children have just died, so I don't want to. I'm going to be very careful not to use their deaths as some sort of weight to how I feel about transgenderism. However, I think what was interesting from a information point of view, that if that had been a man calling himself a woman, we still wouldn't know. I don't think it wouldn't be in the first flush of reporting that actually he was really a man. Whereas it was very quick that we were to understand that this was really a woman. So I think that's interesting. And I don't think that's because we've suddenly got to a super place where the press is starting telling the truth. I think that is to take this particular terrible incident and to prove to everyone that women are violent too. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I think we should be very, very afraid of the fact that the impact on testosterone on women's bodies is being suppressed, whether it's making them more aggressive, which we know it does, or actually increasing their risk of heart failure, which we also know it does. And that's really downplayed and ignored. As for the fact that anybody had a manifesto that meant that they would go and shoot kids, I think we have to accept, certainly following the mobbing of myself and the violence that we know many women throughout the world have experienced through these organizations and this ideology, I think we have to call it terrorist. I think it's about time we were just a little bit honest that the reason they gather to stop women speaking is to terrorize us into silence. And so I think we have to be really honest that this is a far left, albeit deluded and cult-like, but it is a far left cult. And it is a terrorist. It has motives of terrorism. So I think we have to, it now needs to be completely outlawed, and we have to take it very seriously.
I think there's also a level of moral panic or something attending this, because it seems like the society more generally is captivated. You used the word cult, and I think it's a good one. Madonna announced she's doing a concert in Nashville, not for the school, but for transgender rights, which I just feel that is a study in bad taste, that she would take a side, number one, and take the side of the killer. I just don't understand what she thinks she's doing. I don't get it. How could she possibly defend it? I don't understand.
Well, because she's just an attention-seeking narcissist, isn't she? So I guess, I mean, look, I'm not saying that I don't think she had great talent. I think she was amazing, but there would have been something so much more brave if a woman who supposedly never fit the narrative, although I think she probably did, but if she'd been so brave in just accepting age and not sort of filling her whole face full of fillers and her backside, and she's clearly a little off these days. So I mean, to do that, it there's a lot of things that I think, that should be career ending, that should really sort of finish that off, and it isn't. It's perfectly people will champion her, but we will remember when this is all said and done and the truth returns, which I think it always will, especially in countries post-Enlightenment. But when the truth is revealed, we will remember those that capitalized on the lies that were told.
Absolutely. And Harry and Meghan apparently are about to, too. They've got some new impetus through Archwell of supporting boys who don't know what gender they are. I mean, it's just like everything they do is absurd. But anyway.
She was hoping for Diana. I think she was hoping that he'd leave her really quickly and she'd be single mother of the century.
Yeah, I think so too.
No.
I think so too. So I just want to get back to what happened. There was a report, I believe, on your Twitter feed this morning that poor woman who got punched in the face. Actually, what was the injury there?
It's a broken eye socket or fractured skull. I think I put broken eye socket, but it might have been.
Oh.
It might have been a fracture. So I guess it might have been up here rather than here. But it's certainly a fracture of some description.
Yeah, awful. I just want to ask you before we go about the you were, as I understand it, visited by the Yorkshire Police, the West Yorkshire Police. I hope it wasn't our heroine cop from Happy Valley, because we all love her, right?
No, I've been interviewed under caution 3 times. So 2018, 2018 twice, two different charges. Well, they didn't make any charges, but
yeah,
2 different incidents. About 5 weeks ago, I was interviewed, and they've decided not to go ahead with charges because I basically just said nothing that was even remotely hateful, let alone criminal. I've had the police knock on my door because they said I was being untoward about paedophiles, which frankly I thought that would be a group that you could be untoward about. And I was arrested during lockdown for trying to host a speaker's corner up in Leeds. And that was after we'd had, well, let me just go back a bit. Apparently, if you are marching on behalf of a man that was killed in America and you're marching for racial equality in the UK, you couldn't catch COVID. But if you were going to talk about women's rights, you were literally killing a whole city. So then they arrested me and they put me in a holding room that literally had human fluids of different description on the walls. So I think I might have been able to catch COVID from the blood, snot and semen on the walls.
The cops in the UK seem really captured to me. I've read a couple of stories about people who've misgendered somebody on Twitter, and the cops are at the door. I mean, it's remarkable. What is going on over there, Kellie-Jay?
Look, I think we politicize the police force. They changed from a police force to a police service. We now have police and crime commissioners, which are elected officials. We also have a younger police force because who would want to be a police officer, to be frank? So I think it's that. And I just, when you see a bloke that probably drinks warm beer in a pub, and, you know, the most exciting thing that man does is choose a different ale. And he's in his boring voice telling someone that they should be careful because they've just misgendered. And this guy's like in his 50s. You just feel like giving him a shake and saying, are you absolute? Do you know that your mouth is saying these things? It is literally saying to someone in an area where there will definitely, within 50 miles of any police officer, there will be a trafficked girl or a trafficked woman, or there will be a brothel full of women that have been trafficked from a poor country in Europe or China or, you know, wherever, like. And they're trying to police pronouns. I mean, it's just preposterous. I can only think it's another. Well, I would say it's misogynist, but it's mostly women that have been visited by the police for the catastrophic crime of misgendering. It's mostly women, but there have been some men. But then there's also narcissistic men that wear women's clothing that feel that they have a right to tell on someone to the police every time they don't like something. I mean, the amount of times that someone's told me what they'd like to do to me, like whether I'm with my kids or not, and I don't mean aggressive people. I mean in the past when a man thought I was attractive and felt the urge to tell me exactly how he found me attractive, if I rang up, I would never even think about ringing up the police. Oh, by the way, someone just said he'd like to shag me in front of my children. Like, you know, it's like women don't do that. We just carry on. Whereas these men, they've never been told no. And so they think if someone says you're a man, that they must be punished. It's just crazy.
It is crazy. Where do you think this is going? I said I might be contradicting myself here, but But I said at the beginning that the video of you being pulled away from a mob may have been a tipping point, but at the same time, I'm super worried because it just feels like more and more institutions are captured. And so, if it isn't stopped, if people don't wake up to what is happening here, and I'm talking about the indoctrination in schools and the capture of businesses and the the schools to me are the scariest thing, but if and the corruption of language, even, I mean, how insulting to use the words they do about us now. It's just awful. Where will, if it's not stopped, where will we be in 10 years? What is the end game here?
Well, I think that it's an information war. So I do think there are. I wouldn't be surprised if we find a room somewhere where some oligarchs are sort of playing a game of Risk with our lives. It just feels so, because it's not real. It feels weird. So there's a number of places it can go. It can be the end of our civilization as we know it. Other civilizations have fallen before, and this is kind of the final frontier, which is sex. Otherwise, we are just going to be jobless, maybe fertility, like jobless, sterile, people just in a system of feudalism where only a very small number of people actually have access to wealth. I mean, I do feel like we're on a slippery dystopian slope.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think most people don't get it. I think they're waking up a little. But without a legacy media that reports objectively on our situation, we're sunk. I've been saying it for years. I said when I started the podcast 3 years ago, everything wrong with the world is because the media is corrupt. If the media was asking hard questions and holding people accountable and not telling lies about people like you, I mean, the white power sign story is like that. That's like the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And these 25-year-old sort of digital journalists who've all taken the social justice warrior course in J school, right? Oh, Kellie-Jay made it. I mean, what are you taught? Do you understand how ridiculous they look? I mean, it's just beyond, right?
I go a bit nuts right in the middle of the mob, and I see the guy that put that report out from News Hub, and he stood right in front of me, and I start saying, "This is you. This is what you did. You told everyone I was a fucking Nazi. This is on you." I do go quite mad, but I'm so angry. I think I could have so much more I could have done in that moment. But yeah, he's smug as well. And at the end of it, when he saw what happened. He saw some of the assaults, and he saw what happened to me. And at the end of it, he's all smiling, saying, "How do you feel it went to the people on the mobbing side?" You know, and the man that started that whole thing to get people there, that in the middle of it, I think his name's Shalene or something, in the middle of the mobbing, and just after, he's doing a, "Hey, yay, we got Posie Parker." He's doing a little piece to camera. He just won a bloody Person of the Year award, Youth Person of the Year award, like last night or whatever time it is in New Zealand. But yeah, they're sort of Thursday night. He's won an award.
Yikes. Last question. You are obviously well put together, well spoken. I understand you're starting a women's political party, which is pretty cool. But on a deeper level, how are you doing? These are traumatic events. Do you go home when there's no one around and go into your room and close the door and cry? Like, how are you managing to get through this intact emotionally?
I don't know. I must have some resilience built in somewhere. I'm sure my life experience informs my capability of surviving trauma. That's probably about as far as I'd say, but we knew we'd have to make sacrifices to win this. Everybody knew that we'd have to make sacrifices to win this. And I didn't die. But
you thought you might. You thought you might.
I did. I really did. I really didn't think I was going to come out alive. I really did think that my kids, that was it. They'd lose me and my husband would lose me. But I guess to put yourself out there, I've got a really strong ego. And by that, I don't mean that I think I'm great. I mean, I have a really strong ego. I have a really fat layer of ego around me that keeps me pretty safe and is very objective. So when I was a young girl, and it's a very brief story. So when I was a young girl, I could sing. I can still sing. And my cousin could sing. And my cousin and I shared a part in a school play. And just out of the blue, the headmistress, when we were like 10 years old, asked us to stand up and sing the song. And my cousin was nervous, so she couldn't sing. And I was nervous, and I was absolutely brilliant. And from that moment on, and I've always been a little bit confident and whatever anyway, but from that moment on, older girls felt that they could call me names and didn't like the fact that I was confident. And I never once thought it was my problem.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that's a learned thing. I think that's just a thing. So I always knew it was their problem. I always knew it was jealousy. When women still come at me now, for whatever reason, I can read what it is, why they're there. And it's even women that adore me, even women that say these amazing things about me. I know it's not really about me. It's always about what somebody needs you to be, unless they know you really well, is what somebody needs you to be. So I have to, I guess it's all about that. It's all about being able to be very, very, very objective about what's happening. And I didn't die. And I've got a really stable life. And so I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah. Have any of these guys ever reached out to you? Have you changed any minds of these people? Has anybody said, I was wrong, I think you're cool, or maybe I need to rethink my aggression or anything? That would be a lovely idea, wouldn't it?
I've had girls detransition.
Yeah.
And I've had girls not transition. So girls that have started to begin to say something, and their mothers just, she said, well, so what I would do is I would just have you on. I would just have your live streams on. And my daughter would just walk past, and at first it would be, oh, she's a TERF, she's a bigot. Then she'd walk a bit slower through the room, and then you'd know she was listening outside, and then she's listening, and then she's like, she's right. So there's been a lot of moments like that. I feel deeply privileged just when, I don't know if you watch any of the speeches at all from the whole tour, there's a girl in Melbourne. She sort of says, COVID happened, and I was online, and because I was online a lot, I sort of watched a lot of the left, and I realized they'd lost their fucking minds. And then she just goes off, and it's beautiful. And the way the Australians swear is it's just lovely. And she, it's so moving because she's so angry, and every single word is absolutely on point and articulate. And what's even more beautiful than that, which is perfectly sums up what Let Women Speak is about, is she came along, nobody knew who she was. She had a little ear defenders on. She was obviously a young mother. She said all this stuff. Everyone went wild. She was shaking the whole time she was doing it. Afterwards, I gave her a hug because she really was kind of all the adrenaline and all the emotion and everything just sort of was overwhelming. And then she just disappeared, and nobody's heard from her again. Nobody knows who she is. And she just came along, and she just did this thing because we created this space in which we said to women, you can come and speak, and we will look after you, and we'll make them. Obviously, we couldn't in Auckland, but we will look after you. And the strength of our numbers will allow you to find your courage to say the things that you want to say. And she did, and she went, and oh my God, amazing.
Have your numbers increased since Auckland? Are you seeing an uptick? Massive?
Yeah. I've gone so I was banned from Twitter for like nearly 5 years. So I went back on Twitter with about 5,000 followers in Christmas. So a couple of days before Christmas. And then I was up to about 40,000. Now I'm on about 85,000 followers. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's fast. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And t-shirts are going off the charts. My poor lady next door, I think we must have about 400 outstanding orders. So
well, and the t-shirts are great. And also I just want to say too that J.K. Rowling is right in there, isn't she, supporting you? I mean, I really dig JK. She is awesome, right?
Yeah. Yeah. She's the difference between whether my little boys would read or not. Like, she literally has changed the lives of millions of kids. And not because the stories, not just because the stories are great, but because without those stories, they wouldn't have read anything.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, amazing woman.
Yeah. Well, Kellie-Jay, you're something. Thanks for doing what you're doing. I know that women are very emotional about that video, as I admit it. You looked very small and helpless in that moment, and brave too. And thanks for doing what you're doing. It's really important.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much.
You too. Talk to you later. Bye, Kellie-Jay.
Bye.
So that was Kellie-Jay Keen, aka Posie Parker, in the UK, talking about that terrible, terrible event that happened on March 25th in Auckland, New Zealand, after the media had whipped the community into a frenzy against her. And that's actually what happened. I was looking at some of the coverage. It was just ghastly. And so we're going to play at the very, very end of the show, we're going to play more of those lovely voicemails from women for Kellie-Jay. And we got one from a man, and we're going to let him have a little say too. So that's going to come at the very end of the show. But I promised you a little bit of reporting, and I want to just read you a couple of things that may answer some questions. And these are things we're going to get into in more detail as time goes on and this thing keeps going. As I said, we are not against actual trans people here. We are very concerned about this movement that is trying to, I feel, and many women do, eliminate women, and who are apparently increasingly more and more violent about getting what they want. So that's where I'm coming from. Okay, so one of the big questions is, how did they get so far so fast? 1 minute, we're all kind of bopping along, and the next minute, they're running the world. This trans extremist movement is into corporation speak. It's into girls' sports. It's into our change rooms. It's into our rape crisis centers. It's everywhere. And if you say anything about it, you need to be crushed, right? How did that happen quickly? So there's a very good piece. I'm trying to get this guy on. His name is Toby Rogers. And this is what he said. And he's someone who knows the movement really well, the trans movement. He says, "To me, the incredible sophistication of the trans movement feels like the work of elite pharma PR firms. Trans messaging, vaccine messaging, and Democratic Party messaging all have the same look these days. Lean, fast, hard-hitting, planned out months or years in advance, focus group tested, and perfectly executed. The similarities between these campaigns would make sense if they were all using the same PR firms. But why would pharma be so intent on promoting trans acceptance? Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson are financial supporters of the Human Rights Campaign. This is one of the groups that's very, very vocal for trans extremism. But beyond that, it does not appear that pharma coordinates with trans groups at all. The biggest trans advocacy groups in the country are all tiny, less than 100,000 K in annual revenue. There is no way that they have the wherewithal to land a story on the front page of the New York Times, even though that happens on a regular basis. It appears that pharma is doing this on their own to serve their own interests. Why? And so the answer to that question, obviously, is that if you can get kids onto these puberty blockers and other things that happen throughout their lives once they try to switch, it's a billion dollar industry. So I thought that was very interesting. Imagine like the words gender affirming care instead of what it actually is, right? Which is pretty brutal and pretty violent, but they call it gender affirming care. They've got these really smart phrases for things, including calling anybody who disagrees with anything they say a transphobe. That just comes instantly. And you saw it come for for Kellie-Jay. Here's the other thing I wanted to read. This is Christopher Rufo, who's pretty smart. And it's from a piece he wrote called "The Trans Child is the New Totem of the American Left. How True?" President Biden wants to codify sex change operations into federal law, revealing a disturbing new metaphysics. President Biden has announced his support for federal legislation requiring states to allow hormone treatments and sex change operations for transgender kids. He blasted recent restrictions on such practices in Florida as close to sin, and said that access to transgender medical procedures should qualify as a basic civil right. I mean, it sounds good, doesn't it? But when the children are being co-opted by a cult, it doesn't sound so good. The president's message is dystopian on its face, but at a deeper level of analysis reveals the disturbing new metaphysics of the American left, which has elevated the transgender child into a totem. In primitive societies, tribal cultures would use totems to connect with nature, mediate their relationship with the spirit world, and honor the categories of the masculine and feminine. In modern America, by contrast, political activists use the transgender child as a postmodern totem to connect with a utopian, technologically perfected future and to create a new category beyond man and woman. Through chemical and surgical intervention, they believe they can smash the patriarchy and transcend the limitations of human nature. In truth, however, these procedures will not usher in a utopia, as we are beginning to see with the first cohort of detransitioners. So-called gender-affirming care denies biological reality and often results in horrific complications and regrets. The American doctors who are performing mastectomies on healthy young girls and penectomies on healthy young boys are not the saviors of the future. They are the butchers of the present, enacting a postmodern form of child sacrifice. Wow. So I thought that was really, really smart. The other thing I just want to say, because it's my show and I can say what I want, I am increasingly disturbed by the rhetoric that suggests that trans people are the only people in the world under threat. This is not true. They use that. They use the suicides to blackmail people, kind-hearted people, into going along. Let me just, before we close the show, with the voices of women who are supporting Kellie-Jay Keen and who left messages for us on our machine, let me just end with this little bit of statistical information. Vienna, Austria, the 25th of November, 2021. Globally, 81,000 women and girls were killed in 2020. Around 47,000 of them, 58%, died at the hands of an intimate partner or a family member, which equals to a woman or girl being killed every 11 minutes in their home. This is according to data published today by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. The research brief released on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women is based on data from 95 countries on gender-related killings of women and girls by intimate partners and family members. So I'm just putting that out there, people. Maybe the NHL, instead of taping their sticks, whatever, could have a moment of silence for all the women, namely all the mothers of those hockey players and the sisters of those hockey players who might be thinking about violence against women too. No one talks about it anymore. And these big woke corporations do not give a shit about their female customers. Dylan Mulvaney, just want to get this in before I say goodbye through the voices of these women, is now Kate Spade's official model and spokesperson. Really? Not shopping there. You know, he bugs me, as I've said on the show before. He is doing an effeminate, hyper-effeminate, Lucy Ricardo caricature of women. And making money off it and acting as if this kind of ditzy, clumsy, silly, stupid creature is what women are really like. It's not. I love Lucille Ball, but she was a comedian, right? This guy says he's trans. I mean, honestly, maybe Kate Spade's company, I know she's gone, but maybe Kate Spade's company could be focusing on something like violence against actual women instead of that. That's what I think. Come for me if you will. Those are my feelings about it. And now we're just going to close with some more voices from our recording machine for Kellie-Jay Keen. Stay critical.
Hi Trish, this is a message for Kellie-Jay Keen. I am Charlotte. I live in a smallish town outside of London in the UK, and I've been following Posie Parker for a number of years now, actually encouraged by my mum, who became pretty obsessed with this issue way back when, a number of years ago. And we all sort of, and I hate to say it now, kind of laughed at my mum that she was just mad and this wasn't happening. And the last kind of 2-3 years, I've seen just how hated women are. And it just blows my mind as the mother of 2 young daughters. But I just wanted to say I've followed everything that's gone on in Auckland. I don't know what words I have for Posie Parker other than thank you, and you are not alone and we are behind you, even though it feels like many people aren't. I am 37. I am shocked by the number of women I work with who are in their 20s and 30s who cannot see what's happening and quite frankly are on the wrong side of history. And I just want to thank you both for everything that you do. Trish, my mother and I, and actually our broader family would not have got through COVID in the last few years without you either, because you have just been a voice of reason over on the other side of the world. So thank you both so much, and don't stop.
Hello, Posie Parker. And I know your name is also Kellie-Jay, but Posie Parker's great. Wanted to thank you for all the work you've been doing on behalf of my children, my daughters, my grandsons, and all of the people who know that there is a wonderful difference between men and women. Equality has never meant being the same thing, but being equal. And it's really sad that your average person these days doesn't even understand that. Keep up your good work. Our spirits and our voices are behind you. In fact, I know that you've given a lot of us courage. My name is Marit Jacks, and I'm from Guelph, Ontario.
Kellie-Jay, I am shocked that what was done to you was done in the name of anti-fascism. My father was a volunteer in the Spanish Civil War in the fight against fascism. He was an anti-fascist. These thugs know nothing of anti-fascism. They are a stain on history. But I say to you what was said of those volunteers. You are legend. You are history.
This message is from Roxanne Halverson, a.k.a. the Intrepid Viking on Substack. Kellie-Jay, I want to let you know how much I admire and applaud your courage and commitment to speaking out about how the transgender movement is infringing on women's rights, our safe spaces, and even our vocabulary. We've reached a point where we as women are no longer allowed to enjoy and celebrate our womanhood. As a matter of fact, we can no longer even define what a woman is. This is misogyny, and we saw it in its most vile form when the transgender extremists violently attacked you in New Zealand because you merely were trying to have women's voices heard. To quote U.S. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who has also taken up this fight against transgenderism, there is no greater expression of hatred and hostility towards women than to try and erase our existence as a category of people and to minimize us to being a construct of anyone's imagination. Again, Kellie-Jay, thank you, and know that because of the real awareness you have raised, you are not alone in this fight.